So Intrapreneur, is that like down the road of like the rocket fuel book where you've got your visionary and integrator, or am I missing the mark of what you're saying there?
You're not missing the mark. It's similar, but the biggest distinction that we make between that, because most people know of integrators and visionaries, is that integrators are not usually the ones getting their hands dirty, right? And the entrepreneurs that we're working with are typically anywhere from like early 7 figures to 9 figures, probably in the breadth of the core right fit audience is 10, 20, 30 to 50 million, right around that area. And typically what you're going to find is that like early stage entrepreneurs, people who are growing and scaling their business, looking to get to 50, 100, potentially $1 billion, they're not looking for somebody just to oversee things, right? And, so we always say do and be, not just oversee. So integrators are amazing. We work with integrators all the time, but they typically lack the actual functional knowledge and the strategy to actually do the thing, right? So delegation is wonderful, but there's not a lot of entrepreneurs who just want to have quote unquote dead money in their organization. They want player coaches. They want doers and beers and leaders all at the same time. And that's what we teach our people to do. So most of the certification programs out there, like, Rocket Fuel with integrators, online business managers, director of operation, they're all taught to kind of oversee things, which is great. But if you're trying to create an intrapreneurial culture, you want to create autonomy so that everyone can build, you can help them navigate those seasons of change in the best way possible. So that's where we draw the line.
Cool. So what's your story? How did you get into doing what you're doing, and who's kind of your avatar? Who do you best serve, or who do you love coming alongside of most?
Yeah. So my ideal client, my right fit client is an entrepreneur who is a little bit frustrated. Maybe they're caught in the middle of some things. They're reviewing a lot of things or approving. They're kind of the hub, unfortunately, and they need to stay out in front to keep their ministry or their movement or their brand on track, right? To generate more interest. And they're just, quite frankly, not as good as other people could be at what they do, right? So maybe they hold sales, marketing, operations, maybe even a little customer support, responsibilities, but they should only really be in marketing, or they should only really be in ops, or they should only really be in sales. So what we do is we come alongside them, kind of decouple them from the day to day so that they can work, on the business and on the brand and on the mission rather than in it. And then we step in as entrepreneurs, as a team, and we come in and we fill those gaps. We help to create, we help to build, we help to scale, we help to SOP, all the things to make sure that we can kind of essentially navigate like this forest that they're walking through, cut the trees down, build a path, and then basically backfill ourselves with people who are more generalists, right? Because a specialist only really needs to come in to kind of create, that foundation and create that structure, and then pass it off so that it can be a little bit more manageable, financially manageable for the people coming behind you, right? Because it's
so do you see what you do as kind of like an agency, like with consulting, where you're going to come in and walk beside an entrepreneur or a company, small company, for a season, and then go, look, we're going to charge you a fee to do that, but we're working ourselves out of these roles. We're going to step into these roles, get you free from them, and then we're going to find people to take the spots that we're taking. Is that kind of the big idea?
100%. Yeah. Unless that entrepreneur really wants to continue to grow and push the boundaries, what we found is generally 12 to 36 months is like 36 months about our limit, right? And that's people who go fast. They want to build big things like that. Because after a while, it doesn't make financial sense to when there's an SOP to follow, to pay somebody who can specialize in those specific areas. So you asked like kind of where I got my start is, I started doing like this sort of work. I didn't recognize it as such, like, early stage. I started with early stage startups in the Washington, D.C. area. And I got an opportunity to kind of not only add value to like organizations themselves, but I found myself really interested in a variety of different functions: sales, marketing, the business side, right? Customer support, really strategy, technology. And I kind of cut my teeth in those early stage startups. And what I didn't realize at the time was that I was getting like a vast majority or a diversity of experience, but kind of staying in one little lane. I wasn't focused on a director of sales sort of role, right? But then once I stepped out, I met in May of 2016, I met the president of the John Maxwell team on a bus in Atlanta. we had a 2-minute conversation. He's like, I want to hire you. And I said, for what? He's like, I don't know yet, but I know that you're the kind of person that we need to bring in here. So I started consulting with them in 2016. And I quickly became like the director of sales and marketing and operations for John Maxwell. So we helped grow his certification program from about 9,000 to 40,000 in just under 3 years. So led all sales, marketing, paid media, operations, even some live event related things for on-stage management. It was this really cool experience in which I realized, man, like all I'm doing, like my recipe, if you will, was I believed in John. Like I was a follower of John and I believed in him. I believed in the mission. I believed in adding value to people. And all I was really doing was taking that vision, kind of embracing it as my own, and then building what he said he wanted within the organization, right? And it just comes so naturally. So I started to say, man, like the Lord really kind of started to impress, like you need to create more entrepreneurs. Like this is a thing that entrepreneurs need, because so many people, either they quit on the dream or they get frustrated, right? Because like, they have a smattering of VAs or Upwork or Fiverr. And it's like, it's just this piecemeal organization that doesn't have any culture. It doesn't have any accountability because everybody's only responsible for their little thing. So the entrepreneur essentially becomes the entrepreneur within the organization to build, innovate, and scale so they can continue to advance their vision.
As I'm hearing you say that, my mind's going in two directions as it always does. Because just a quick story about me. I grew up in pastoral ministry. My dad was a pastor. Had a good experience with that. Some pastors' kids don't, but it was good for me. But I did not want to do that with my life. I was going to do other things, specifically firefighting. I became a career firefighter at the age of 21. Thought I was going to do that the rest of my life. Then God messed up all my plans, called me into preaching. And we moved out here to South Dakota, where I live now, and planted a church back in 2004. Did that for quite a few years. I didn't know I was an entrepreneur back then. In hindsight, it's so obvious. It's like, of course, I came and planted a church. And in our time of leading that over 17 years, we grew it into 6 different, multi-site locations and built out teams. So now I'm full-time firefighter. I have a couple businesses that I oversee. I'm still on staff at a church, but I'm out of that lead pastor gig that I had for 17 years. I'm always thinking about the church because I still love the church and I love pastors and I lead a lot of pastors. But then I also think business. So as I'm hearing you unpack this, I'm like, okay, in the church world, there's pastors, like delegation, building teams is such a thing. There's so many average pastors are overworked, they're underpaid, but they're doing it all. They're doing way too much. They need to, I've helped pastors build teams, like volunteer teams, but where we just really get clear on like job description and developing the leaders to take that weight off of your shoulders. You never should have been doing it in the first place. And let's give them that role and responsibility and the authority to carry out that work. And then they'll oversee a team.
I believe like intrapreneurship is the way. I mean, like to put it biblically, like there's so many parallels that would suggest like partnering with the visionary is the way, is a kingdom way to go about like business, right? So, I mean, I just think of Nehemiah and like how like he built the walls, right? Like he had to commission with the Lord, but he also had to commission with the people who built right in front of their homes. Like they were responsible for building the walls right in front of where they lived, right? So it's like there's so much goodness to like what that looks like and how that operates in both, overtly in the kingdom and then covertly in business world. So I absolutely love to talk about it. And I think it's the way.
Something else I'm thinking of as I hear you say that is, here's another profile. This is kind of where I'm getting excited about the idea of an intrapreneur. I've never really heard that term before, but because there's guys who are not wired to be the visionary, and yet what you're talking about is different than just going and working a job where you're trading your time for money, because it's still an entrepreneurial thing. You're just flying a little bit under the. This is a really rough metaphor, but when I was kind of transferring out of pastoral ministry in terms of that lead role, the metaphor that hit me from nature one day is just kind of watching geese fly. I live up in the north, so I don't know if you're aware, but geese fly south. They're smart enough with their pea-sized brain to leave here when it gets cold. And the geese will trade out. That lead goose is smart enough to fall back to the back of the line and just fly in the updraft of everyone in front of him. and so that's where I was saying in that season of my life is like, I just need to fall to the back of the line. I don't want to quit. I just am tired of taking the brunt of all of this. And there's a lot of guys that are good in that role long term. Like they don't want to be the one out front, but if they can fly in the updraft of that visionary leader, like that gives them an option to still be entrepreneurial and not just go, well, I need to go find a job somewhere. Like, am I tracking with kind of what you're about with intrapreneurialism? If that's a word, am I saying that right?
We say entrepreneurship, but yeah, absolutely. It's, I think there's a couple of people who get to catch their breath, right? I think the entrepreneur gets to catch his or her breath because of what they're trying to accomplish and the weight of all the things that need to be done, delivered, fulfilled, supported, created, like especially if you're dealing with an online business, right? Any sort of online presence, it almost magnifies it to another degree. So an intrapreneur is really somebody who's like, one of my greatest testimonials, and I received this a couple of times, is like, they said, I never knew somebody could care as much or more about my business than I do, right? And that's the thing. Like an intrapreneur is not really interested in trying to take your spotlight. What they want to do is they want to understand the vision, understand what we're trying to create, and then build it and implement it within the organization, not without the entrepreneur's help, right? But at a fraction of their involvement, right? So it's like the number one thing that we work with is, our framework is problem, priority, procedure, process, product, partnership, right? So there's problems everywhere. There's problems in every single business. If you can't see them, then you're not looking, right? But the next step is priority. The problem with most organizations, the problem with how organizations, churches or non-churches combined, right, is that everybody stays in their lane. They look in their lane, right? Like if you're responsible for, children and families, you're not worried about, anything else. Like that's all you focus on. The problem with that is that the inputs and the outputs around you are affecting your responsibilities, but you're not solving for those. That's where the entrepreneur comes in because they have an entrepreneurial mindset and they're coming in, they're solving problems in one part, in other parts. And I always say, like, instead of like swimming in swim lanes, we're swimming across the swim lanes and we're just identifying priority. And the entrepreneur is the one that says, hey, this is number one priority. This is number two. Here's your list, so to speak, until that entrepreneur can run with it. Because the thought of early on with a lot of the entrepreneurs were like, well, I don't want someone to just come learn my business and go launch their own thing and duplicate what I'm doing. I'm like, well, in that case, you hired another entrepreneur, right? Like you hired somebody who just needed a breather. Like entrepreneurs are here for the long haul. They're looking to build and they're looking to create in that way. And the differentiation that you'll find, the reason that I know this is a thing, right, is because employees, even DOOs, OBMs, and sometimes integrators, I have a good level of respect for all three, but is like I look at experience in three different levels. You have basic experience, right? You can follow a process. You have advanced experience. You can create processes. And you have global experience. You understand the inputs and the outputs of processes to create systems, right? Systems is what scale businesses, right? Systems is what creates massive impact and influence in the world because everybody doesn't need to be always all hands on deck. And typically, you don't just jump right to global, right? Like that would be crazy to understand to jump right to global. So the problem is that people underneath of you in basic and advanced, they don't actually understand the global level of expertise needed. So if you have overseers, over the last year, AI was introduced into the world. What does an overseer know about AI now? Are they just learning about it theoretically? No, you have to actually do it. Yeah. You have to build it. You have to understand that, 3 years ago, if you've been overseeing in an integrator role 3 years ago, well, we went through a pandemic, the introduction of AI, Bitcoin went to absolute almost half of its value. So much has changed in the business world, and the market is just going to get faster. So I think like the involvement of entrepreneurs in the day-to-day while driving and implementing strategy is so important, and it creates a culture of entrepreneurialism that the entrepreneur actually wants, that they get excited about. So yeah, man, cool. I would love to talk about it with your That's
Cool.
audience.
So which are you? Are you an entrepreneur or an intrapreneur?
Great question. I'm kind of a convert, right? It's like I'm intrapreneurial, right? But I'm leading this entrepreneurial movement or entrepreneuring for intrapreneurship. It's kind of strange, not gonna lie. It's a little bit of a mouthful. But what I've found is that the organization that we're building, it's built for entrepreneurs by entrepreneurs. Meaning it's like, I'm not somebody who just like, oh, here's the vision, here's where we're going. It's like, no, we're doing this thing together. The Lord said it was supposed to be easy and we're supposed to do it together. And that's what we're doing. And that's kind of how it's materialized. And I think that's why most entrepreneurs like to work with us so much, because they realize they can rely on you more, right? We have a variety of different skill sets within the team. And typically we show up as a team into an organization. So you don't just get Scott, you get Scott and Sammy and Jamie and Julie and Mitz and Brittany and Logan. You know what I mean? They're behind the scenes. But we're gonna flex into that role because our target audience doesn't need just one person. They usually need a handful of people because, there's a lot going on.
Do you have a certain industry that you work in, or do you work with anybody that has a business, whether it's online or manufacturing, or do you have a sweet spot that you look for?
Our sweet spot has been online and actually home services, believe it or not. What we found with home services is heating, electrical, plumbing, they generally don't get a lot of respect from any sort of agency type, but they're the ones, if they've been around for 15, 20 years, they're not going anywhere, right? They've made massive success. So we have construction, solar, HVAC, even spray foam insulation, and also John Maxwell, Jamie Cross, Pedro Deo, other big online entrepreneurs that we've served. So we really serve the gamut. From a manufacturing perspective, here's what I typically say to those organizations is those people typically ask for an operator. I just need an operator. I need an operator. I need an operator. And it's hard to break the mindset of I just need an operator because that's just not how we think. An operator just keeps things going. If that's what you need, we're probably not that, because you're looking for sustainable, I know how much I'm going to pay somebody for the next 10 years. And man, operators don't bring innovation, right? There's a reason why organizations get bought and operators go away, right? Because they need to innovate and grow. So if our clients, if our ideal clients, or our prospects aren't looking to really kind of get to that next level, it's probably not a good fit for us.